Intelligence is an integral component of contemporary law enforcement activities. Passing on its value when disseminating is vital to the intelligence process. This evaluation module has been created in the wake of changes introduced to UK policing in relation to the 5x5x5 evaluation model used with the intelligence report. The reasoning behind this change was to enable standardisation of reporting, which will provide a shared confidence between law enforcement communities and partner agencies. There will be no back record conversion, so it follows that all users need to be familiar with both systems of evaluation. The 3x5x2 system is very similar to its predecessor, the 5x5x5. Evaluation follows the same model and is conducted through an initial assessment, enabling information gatherers to assess the source of the information, relationship of the source to the information, any corroboration which exists, and, finally, with whom the information may or may not be shared. When gathering this information, you should adhere to the laws, policies and regulations as specified by your agency. In the UK, the Management of Police Information 2006, also known as the MOPI, and a number of other laws such as the Data Protection Act of 1998 and the Human Rights Act of 1998 define what is meant by policing purposes. Information for an intelligence purpose should be recorded on the 3x5x2 Information Intelligence Report. This report is a tool which enables the management of information which has or may have risk attached to it. It is a standard format for managing the evaluation, source and provenance of information, as well as the manner in which it should be handled and disseminated. The use of a 3x5x2 report provides an audit trail which is integral to the NIM or any other intelligence process, ensuring the appropriate authorisation is received and that all information is given a value. It also ensures consistency between police forces and other agencies using the system and enables them to share intelligence more easily. The majority of information in an intelligence business area should be recorded using the 3x5x2 form. To conform with most government security requirements, once a report has been completed, it should be assigned an appropriate protective marking which indicates the sensitivity of the information contained within. The majority of this information will be personal data. The person compiling, time and date, source details and URN numbers survive from the previous 5x5x5. These fields are to identify the person completing the report, whether sworn officers or police staff. The field should include their rank or position and posting location. The date and time field should be the date and time the report was submitted. The information source could be technical or personal. Technical information should always be made secure by using an intelligence source reference number, abbreviated to ISR. With regards to personal information, this can be the name and address of the person providing the information or an ISR number. If not using information handling software such as Niche or similar, it is our view that ISR numbers should always be used in preference to personal data, although this may create more work for the intelligence unit. You should, of course, comply fully with your force recording policy. It is important that, in order to avoid any chance of the information source being compromised, source details, technical or personal, should not be included in the main body of the intelligence report. The final, sanitized version of any intelligence report which is to be distributed and made available for action by operational officers and staff should not contain the real identity of any source anywhere within the published document. Law enforcement officers, technical sources and staff are all information sources for these purposes and should be treated as such. All organisations must have procedures in place to safeguard the correct identity of any source to prevent it being revealed. Previously, sanitisation was completed by the person submitting the intelligence report and was achieved by creating an original followed by a sanitised version for dissemination. The new recommendation is that, if editing or sanitising is required, the intelligence unit will create a second sanitised version of the intelligence report. Source data will be removed and a further URN will be added to the second sanitised report, which will then be cross-referenced to the original. Your organisation's local policy will stipulate who has access to unsanitised reports. The original reports must be retained and kept secure to guarantee that source information is not revealed. Pieces of information from the same source, but regarded as completely different matters, should be detailed on separate intelligence reports. If a solitary source of information offers a number of items of intelligence pertinent to the same issue that could possibly compromise the source, separate intelligence reports should be considered. This is to avoid a particular source being identified due to the possibility that that source may be the only one aware of all the information obtained. Evaluation of the information source is made by the person submitting the information and should describe the reliability of that source. This evaluation should be based on professional judgment, free of any bias. Remember that, although the person from whom you gain the information could be a criminal, homeless and/or a drugs user, this does not necessarily mean they are not telling the truth. Conversely, just because an individual is affluent and has a high status in society, does not necessarily mean that he or she is always truthful. Source evaluation, the first part of the 3x5x2. 1. Reliable. This grading is used when the source is believed to be competent and has previously provided information which has been generally reliable. It may include information from human intelligence, including police officers, technical, scientific and forensic sources. Note, however, this grading does not include family members or friends who give such information for the first time with regards to policing. They would start at 2, untested. 2. Untested. This is used where the source has not previously provided information to the person receiving it or has provided previous information that has not yet been substantiated or corroborated. This does not necessarily mean that the source is unreliable. The information should, however, be treated with caution and corroboration should be sought. This would apply to information when the source cannot be determined, for example, through Crime Stoppers. 3. Not reliable. This code should be used where there are reasonable grounds to doubt the reliability of the source. Previous information may have proved routinely unreliable or misleading. These grounds should be specified using the Intelligence Report Risk Assessment and may include concerns regarding the authenticity, trustworthiness, competence or motive of the source, or lack of confidence in any technical equipment being used. Corroboration should be sought before acting on this information. Using colour coding to assist, you can now see how the new 3-part source evaluation correlates into the old 5-part. 1. Reliable is the old A and B, 2. Untested is the old E, and 3. Not reliable is the old C and D. In effect, always and mostly have merged into 1, and sometimes and unreliable have merged into 3. Evaluation is fluid and must be subjected to constant review. It can affect the whole intelligence process through analysis and dissemination and onto the management of information. Using the characteristics already discussed, this process must be as accurate as possible. Whichever code you decide upon, this relates to the source of the information, if human, the person to whom you are speaking. Should your source state that someone else gave them the information, do not try and evaluate that third party. You are not conversing with them. What you do is move on to the second part of the 3x5x2 and indicate the relationship of your source to the information. Information evaluation. This is where the relationship of the source to the information needs to be indicated and, also, what the quality of the information is likely to be. For the intelligence process to operate successfully, it is essential for the information gathered to be evaluated correctly. Once again, this relies on objective professional judgment. Ascertaining its provenance will assist with these grades. The provenance should be recorded in the original text and not included on the sanitized version. Important provenance questions include: how does the source know this information? Is it first-hand knowledge? If second-hand, hearsay, who told the source and how did they come by it? Is the information corroborated? Is the source in a position to know this information, or could they be saying that they have first-hand knowledge to deceive or enhance their own kudos? Could the source be the instigator? This can now assist you to judge the quality of the source and their relationship to the information, and leads on to the following information codes. This is the 5 part of the 3x5x2. Okay, let's see how the information evaluation works. A. Known directly to the source. This refers to information obtained first-hand, known to be true personally by the source. An example would be through witnessing it. In the UK, consider R.V. Turnbull, 1977. It is important at this stage to differentiate between what the source actually witnessed or observed themselves and what they may have heard from others. For example, he or she has seen it, touched it, smelled it, heard it, tasted it or felt it. B. Known indirectly to the source but corroborated. This is information that has not been personally observed by the source. They do not have first-hand knowledge. It may have come via a third party, hearsay. The information can, however, be corroborated by other information. The corroboration could be technical or other intelligence, investigations or inquiries. Example: the source has been told that John Smith is dealing drugs, and an interrogation of systems reveals that corroborating information exists from a separate, independent source. C. Known indirectly to the source. This is information that has not been personally observed by the source. They do not have first-hand knowledge. It may have come via a third party. For example, hearsay, and there is nothing to provide corroboration. D. Not known. This is information where there is no means of judging the content. This may consist of information from an unidentified source or partners. For example, Crime Stoppers. E. Suspected to be false. To be treated with extreme caution. Irrespective of how the source obtained this information, there is cause to believe the information provided is untrue. If this information is graded in this way, an explanation as to the reasoning for believing it to be untrue should be recorded in the Intelligence Report Risk Assessment. Using colour coding to assist, you can now see how the new intelligence evaluation correlates to the previous 5-part evaluation. A. Known directly to the source is the old 1 and 2. B. Known indirectly to the source but corroborated is the old 3. C. Known indirectly to the source stands alone. D. Not known is the old 4. And E. Suspected to be false is the old 5. It is imperative that the information gathered must be of value and understood without having to refer to other information sources. It must be clear, to the point, and not contain police jargon and abbreviations. The content must comply with the basic principles of 5WH: who, what, when, where, why and how, and should be for a policing purpose as detailed in the Management of Police Information, MOPI. This follows later. Wherever possible, the information ought to be corroborated and its provenance determined. This could be done by researching information systems in other business areas. For example, in the UK, the Police National Computer, PNC, or Command Control Systems. Any inquiries completed should be incorporated in the intelligence report and clearly categorised as such. Databases explored should also be listed. A separate intelligence report must be submitted for any new intelligence which is identified from research. Example, that carried out on non-law enforcement agency databases, including the Internet. Remember, if information is received from multiple sources, this should be recorded on separate forms. Information from one source relating to multiple subjects should be recorded on separate forms, unless the information relates to the subject taking part in a common enterprise. This could be disseminated on the same form, but the subject's personal information, such as addresses, phone numbers and associates, would be on further separate forms. This information has nothing to do with the matter at hand and relates to each subject as individuals. Care should be taken to avoid putting too much information on one form. The confidence matrix assists with evaluation of the information and the confidence that can be placed in it. This, in turn, informs the decision-making process, assists with dissemination, and supports interagency exchanges of intelligence. Using the source evaluation across the top and intelligence assessment on the vertical, information from an untested source, known personally, would have medium confidence. Quality assurance. It will be the additional responsibility of the originating intelligence unit to assess the intelligence report when received for 1. Ensure that data standards have been adhered to. 2. Correct application of the intelligence evaluation codes. 3. Correct and full provenance is contained in the information. 4. Any applicable risks and duty of care concerns. 5. Any scope for further research and development. 6. Intelligence significance. 7. Consider if the information is suitable for dissemination and any necessity to sanitize. When the intelligence report is being assessed in the intelligence unit, the individual recording the intelligence report should be considered as reliable with respect to deciding the source reliability and the information evaluation, except where there is an evident discrepancy or incompatibility. The originator who submitted the report should be contacted to clear up any ambiguity or provide corroboration should it be necessary. If the intelligence report is corrected under these circumstances, there must be an audit trail. This requirement would also include a sanitised report that has been resubmitted and is linked directly to the original. Dissemination. In the world of traditional intelligence, need to know is a well-established security principle. Information needs to be restricted to those who genuinely need it, as risks of leakage increase with wider dissemination. In law enforcement, there is an equally important need-to-share principle. All subtypes of information intelligence, if shared, will aid other agencies and organisations in the preservation of law and protection of society. By establishing information sharing agreements, ISAs, and building sharing communities and relationships, everyone can benefit from each other's intelligence. Dissemination usually refers to the sharing of such information between law enforcement and other recognised agencies. Information sharing agreements, ISAs, should be in place for outside agencies, and all sharing must be lawful, proportionate, justified and necessary. There may be instances where sharing may take place with non-recognised organisations or individuals, but only when absolutely needed and with the correct authorisation. Such instances would most likely come under a duty of care, One such case is Osman versus the United Kingdom, 1998, at the European Court of Human Rights. Risks associated with sharing or not sharing will need to be assessed and recorded as necessary. Police officers must ensure that where information is received which identifies a real and immediate risk to life, all reasonable measures are taken to avoid the risk and prevent injuries. This must then be recorded, as police officers will need to be able to account for their decisions and actions where they may have failed to protect life against a clear threat. The ownership of risk to the information source or anyone else affected by its content always rests with the originating agency. Risks should always be considered carefully with regards to retaining or disseminating intelligence. Any sharing will most likely involve the sanitizing of the original information as mentioned previously and/or imposing conditions restricting its further dissemination or use without reference to the originator. When intelligence is disseminated outside the originating agency, any attached handling conditions must be obeyed by the receiving agency. If there is any breach of this, both agencies may be held answerable for any consequences. Audit trails are needed to evidence the sharing of intelligence reports. Audit trail. This is essential when any intelligence is disseminated. There should be a permanent record of such sharing, and the following details need to be documented. Details of person authorizing. Intelligence recipient. Who is asking for the information? Information disseminated. Purpose of dissemination. What will it be used for? Any further intelligence report risk assessment forms, if applicable. Constraints on the use of the intelligence or any further dissemination. Handling codes and conditions. When considering sharing information or intelligence, it is essential that the correct handling codes are attached to the intelligence reports. This is because, as stated earlier, risks increase with dissemination. The codes are a regulating mechanism for the management of information sharing. The risks associated with shared information must always be weighed against the potential risks of not sharing. This includes sharing within your own organisation. The handling codes are supported by conditions which can reduce the risk. Risk assessment will be examined later in this module. Before disseminating any information or intelligence, the person disseminating should be authorised to do so. Be familiar with the relevant legislation, their organisation's policies, standard operating procedures, and any other information handling frameworks. With the new 3x5x2 intelligence report, the final two relate to dissemination. These are lawful sharing permitted, P, lawful sharing permitted with conditions, C. Lawful sharing permitted, P. To be able to share any information or intelligence, there must be a policing purpose, local procedures in place, for example, an information sharing agreement, and a legitimate need to receive it. Lawful policing purpose is defined as protecting life and property, preserving order, preventing the commission of offences, bringing offenders to justice, and any duty or responsibility arising from common or statute law. These 5 policing purposes are set out in the UK MOPI Code of Practice, providing a legal basis for collecting, recording, evaluating, sharing and retaining police information. They are not a substitute or replacement for any existing duty or power defined by statute or common law. Lawful sharing includes other government sections and authorised private and voluntary areas. Particular questions need to be considered when contemplating whether or not to disseminate intelligence under Code P. For example, is there a legal duty? Who is requesting the information? Why do they need it? What are they going to do with it? Is there likely to be any personal, operational or ethical risks? Dissemination of the intelligence report to the European Union, EU, and European Economic Area, non-EEA law enforcement agencies is allowed without any further risk assessment. If, when disseminating intelligence, there are any worries or a possibility of adverse consequences around how extensively the intelligence may be distributed, consideration should be made to applying conditions, and Code C would apply. It may not be appropriate to allow the distribution of all the information, and sanitization should be considered. Dissemination to non-EEA or EU overseas law enforcement agencies must be risk assessed on an individual basis. In the UK, the Data Protection Act of 1998, DPA, permits personal information to be shared outside the EU, but only after the risks of such sharing have been considered on the grounds of substantial public interest. Substantial public interest in this regard includes investigating serious crime, the maintenance of security and integrity of law enforcement agencies. Organisations should develop a policy to guarantee the correct levels of authorisation for the dissemination of intelligence. With consideration, dissemination can be made to non-prosecuting parties. The necessity of keeping intelligence secure has been examined, together with the fact that it can be shared under certain circumstances with reference to data protection, human rights and other agreements. It is only right to point out at this time, with regards to the UK, that unauthorised sharing of information from HMRC, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, could result in you committing a criminal offence. Any information of that description will contain a warning by HMRC within the document. Lawful sharing permitted with conditions. C. This part of the code does allow dissemination, but places an obligation on the receiving agency to observe any conditions set out in the report. Use of this code means the owner of the intelligence has applied specific handling directives in relation to how this information can or cannot be used. An intelligence report risk assessment should be considered and may be necessary in relation to the information to which it applies. In the UK, Public Interest Immunity, PII, or your own agency's policies should be considered if the intelligence is to be used in court at a later date. Any handling conditions should be contained in the correct section of the intelligence report and should be inserted by the intelligence unit of the owning agency. An intelligence report with conditions should undergo regular reviews to ensure that further dissemination may follow as soon as is practicable when the need for restriction no longer applies as per the MOPI. For example, an operation has finished or the information sensitivity no longer applies. The agency or person receiving such intelligence must abide by the handling conditions. Remember, what is sensitive today may not be tomorrow. Reviews are essential and could lead to further dissemination which might aid other investigations. The recipient must communicate with the owner of the intelligence unit of the originating agency before taking action contrary to any conditions imposed. This example depicts how the new intelligence dissemination system relates to the previous 5-part dissemination. The 2-tier system makes dissemination easier. Conditions are either required or they are not, and a risk assessment may be required. Conditions to be input by the intelligence unit only. A1. Covert deployment. Intelligence may be pooled or validated with other information to build a larger intelligence picture, although action cannot be taken directly. Before taking action in relation to any subsequent intelligence product, authorization must be obtained from the original information owner. A2. Covert use. Covert action may be taken with regards to this intelligence. However, the source, covert methods and techniques and any broader investigative use must be safeguarded. This intelligence must not be used on its own as evidence in any legal proceedings or to support the arrest of any suspects. Such use might compromise the techniques employed and cause personal, operational, ethical or organisational risks. A3. Overt use. Overt action is allowed on this intelligence. The intelligence owner will stipulate how this information can be used by any receiving agency or individual. S1. Delegated authority. Further sanitisation of the information without reference to the intelligence owner is permitted in order to facilitate further dissemination to a broader audience. S2. Consult originator. Sanitisation of the information to facilitate further dissemination to a broader audience is not allowed without first referring to the intelligence owner. This illustrates the steps involved in completing the 3x5x2 intelligence report without referring to the author, time, day and date of the report. Number 1. Government security classification. 2. Information collection and acquisition. 3 source and 5 intelligence evaluations. 3. The intelligence usage, exploitation and dissemination. The handling codes and conditions. Completion considerations. Completing person. The completing person should consider security classifications. This would be official for most UK policing instances and a descriptor added for more sensitive data, official sensitive. UK students, please visit the UK website in the manual. Assess the source of the information. Assess information intelligence offered and the closeness of the source to it. This is separate to the assessment of the source. Consider any risks with regard to sharing or not sharing. Intelligence unit considerations. Risks and duty of care. Intelligence value. Provenance and accuracy. Consider further research. Quality assurance. Sanitisation. Conditions and dissemination. Risk assessment. The risk assessment records the risks associated with sharing or not sharing of the intelligence held within the report. Decisions for not sharing information can be equally as important as those presented during dissemination. Risk assessment is not about eliminating all risks, as this is rarely possible. It is about identifying risk and managing the same. For each identified risk or threat, you should consider how likely it is to occur and how great the impact would be if it does. For each risk, you should identify and consider possible countermeasures, including that information in your decision-making rationale. We can't always avoid risk, only manage it. Almost all the things we do at work involve risk of some kind. Sometimes it can be challenging just to identify the risks, let alone prepare for them. It is useful, however, to consider risks under 3 headings: ethical, personal and operational. Ethical risks. Ethical risks are concerned with personal dishonesty or lack of integrity, simply the rights and wrongs of someone's actions. For law enforcement professionals, this involves obedience to the laws of the land, to the values and principles of the organisation, and includes concern for the health and safety of all parties involved. In considering ethical risks, ask yourself if your decision is lawful, if you can justify your decision, and whether it is proportionate and necessary in the circumstances. Consider the nature and seriousness of the crime or incident, the character and standing of the subject, the consequences to that individual and others, the possibility of disproportionate damage to the professional reputation of yourself and/or the organisation. Personal risks. Personal risks are concerned with identifying whether there is a risk of personal injury to the source, any others who may be involved, or to a member of law enforcement agency, including ourselves. Law enforcement agencies have a duty of care which should not be ignored. We should consider whether a decision is likely to result in death or other physical injury to an individual, or whether a situation might be created which causes psychological damage to an individual or the community as a whole. Operational risks. Operational risks are those impacting upon the standing and reputation of the organisation. They can include damage to community relations, bad publicity, compromising of a sensitive technique, current operation or source, loss of a case at court, or financial or legal liability. Operational risks overlap the other types of risk we have discussed. Record the justification for all decisions made and the authority of the person making those decisions in the risk assessment. These details should be noted, showing the time, day and date. Note: the risk assessment should not be disseminated outside the intelligence or confidential environment. Any handling conditions should be contained in the intelligence report. When a report is being evaluated for dissemination, any attached risk assessment should be subject to review. Consideration should also be given to possible risks which may arise as a result of the dissemination to reports that have not yet been risk assessed. A useful tool that could be used when assessing risks is the risk matrix. I hope you've enjoyed this recording. The actual text for this module can be obtained from berrytext.com.